Hey, thanks for stopping by the Sunshine Cafe. In today's episode, we're talking about a question that so many people ask me. Why is fasting so hard? This is episode 2 in our January mini-series on fasting, and this one is packed with some helpful insights and really some thought-provoking questions, which are all designed to encourage you and gently inspire you. So let's dive in. Welcome back to the Sunshine Cafe. I'm Lisa Roers, your host, and hey, thanks for joining me today. I'm here just to pour some positive back into your day with practical tips and stories to encourage and inspire. So let's dive in. Hello, friends, and welcome back to the Sunshine Cafe. I'm Lisa Roers, your host, and today we're diving into a question I hear all the time. Why is fasting so hard? I hear people ask things like, why do I feel anxious or emotional when I try to fast? And why do I want to end the fast so quickly? And if fasting is really from God, why do I feel so resistant to it? Maybe I'm just not meant to fast. Maybe something is wrong with me. Well, friends, let me answer that one right away. No, nothing is wrong with you. And in this episode, I'm going to unpack for you exactly why. We're going to look at 4 big reasons why fasting can feel especially challenging today in our modern lives. Number 1, it requires change, and change is really hard. Number 2, we live in a constant soup of temptation and distractions. Number 3, our culture no longer honors fasting the way it once did. And number 4, fasting just has a way of exposing things we don't always really want to see about ourselves. Now, before I dive into number 1, I just want to remind you from last week's episode that I've opened up a priority waitlist for a February experience called The Fasting Way. I'll share more about that later, but I just want you to know that it's out there for you, and you can find the link at the top of the show notes. Okay, now let's dive into this first reason that fasting is so hard. Fasting requires us to change, and let's just all agree that change is hard. You know, as human beings, we are wired to like the things that are familiar. We like patterns that are predictable. And, interestingly, we often cling to those patterns even when they are not good for us. This isn't a personality flaw. It's actually a protective instinct. Habits, whether they're healthy or unhealthy, give our brains an anchor of familiarity. They may not be ideal, but at least we know what to expect. Psychologists call this the status quo bias, and this is just kind of a fancy name for our tendency to stick with what we already know because it's familiar. Even when change would be better, the brain often weighs the loss of leaving the familiar more heavily than the gain of something new. That's why people can remain in harmful patterns. The unknown feels scarier than the known, even when the known is hurting them. And this is where fasting comes in. Fasting is one of the most accessible tools we have. You don't need any money to fast. You don't need any special equipment, and you really don't need any training or credentials. What you do need, though, is a heart that's willing to change. Because fasting disrupts familiar patterns that make us feel safe. So it's not just change in your own heart, but change of your normal patterns. And it doesn't just change things that we eat or what information or technology we consume. It actually changes who's in charge. When we choose to fast, we loosen our grip and allow God to reorder the priorities in our lives. That's not a bad thing, but it can be an unfamiliar thing. And unfamiliar things often feel uncomfortable, at least at first. Fasting also interrupts the autopilot that most of us are living on. We do the same thing day in, day out until days turn into weeks and weeks turn into years. And then we pause and we look back wondering, where did all the time go? Interrupting autopilot can feel awkward, like a fish out of water. Similar to those first days you were learning to ride your bicycle or trying a new technology or a new app that you just didn't understand. Nothing feels easy at first because nothing, when you first try it, is automatic yet. And here's the fascinating part about all that discomfort. That uncomfortable feeling you have, it is not failure. It's actually adaptation. Your brain is literally building new neural pathways in that moment. And like the strain you put on your bicep when you're building muscles in your arms, that uncomfortable feeling that you're physically feeling is actually the change happening in your brain. And that, I think, is quite spectacular. When I think about that and look at it from that perspective, I don't mind as much inviting that uncomfortable feeling of hey, this is new and I don't understand a thing about it yet. Although that does take some time to get used to. Fasting also confronts that illusion we all have of control. Fasting asks us to trust God to sustain us and to comfort us and to fill those spaces that we've become really good at filling all by ourselves. And letting go of that control, especially control we've held for years or decades, well, that is hard. Fasting challenges that illusion that we are fully in control. Yes, we can influence many things in our lives, and the success that we have is often a result of our own choices and how well we performed with those choices. But we also need to realize that often the choices that we get to make, and even the next breath we take, is a gift we didn't earn. I once heard it said that control may build my success, but surrender builds my peace. I've experienced that over and over again. The tighter I cling to something, the further away it feels. But when I release my grip and just trust God to help me with all the details, ironically or not so ironically, everything seems to fall into place. So there is that mental choice of letting go for sure, but there's also a physical component to this resistance as well. When something feels uncomfortable or unfamiliar, our nervous system can actually interpret it as unsafe. And that's why fasting can trigger a mild fight or flight response, not because it's actually harmful, but because it's new. And anyone who has successfully experienced fasting, who has gone through those painful lessons of growth and healing or pruning, they will tell you that the discomfort is often that doorway to transformation. In fact, Scripture reminds us in Hebrews 12:11 that no discipline seems pleasant at the time, but painful. Later on, however, it produces a harvest of righteousness and peace for those who have been trained by it. Another reason we resist change is because, well, frankly, change slows us down, and we don't like that. I'm not sure what we're all racing toward. It feels kind of like from a very early age, we are constantly feeling like we're trying to play catch up. But what are we catching up to? We live in a culture that's always rushing, always chasing the next milestone, always afraid of falling behind. Slowing down exposes our impatience and that restlessness. It forces us to notice our own emotions, our fears, our shortcomings, and it allows us to celebrate our strengths and our successes. When you've been used to running on fumes and racing through life, well, a pause can feel kind of scary. Like, oh no, what am I missing? What if I'm more behind now than I was when I started? What if someone else is getting ahead of me? Those anxious thoughts can really take over. But that pause also allows us to notice what really matters in life. The relationships we have or have neglected, the beauty around us, gratitude, and God's presence. So if fasting feels difficult for you, let me just encourage you, because that difficulty is actually a result of God inviting you into something new, something you haven't yet grown comfortable with. Perhaps there is more than just what we are so busy chasing. The second reason fasting is so hard is we live in this soup of temptation, and I don't just mean food. We live in a world that's constantly overstimulated, endlessly distracted, and rarely ever quiet. If you pause and really think about it, many of us are deeply uncomfortable with silence. There's almost always some kind of background noise going on, the TV in the other room, music in the car, earbuds in our ears, white noise in the office. Fans are humming, podcasts are playing, screens are calling us with answers to nearly every question we could ever think to ask. And then you add in the noisy background sounds of just modern life. Sirens and traffic and horns and voices and machines and noise becomes the norm. Silence, on the other hand, feels strange, and for many people, very uncomfortable. You ever experienced that moment where you're trying to sleep on vacation in a hotel room that's unfamiliar to you, and you try to turn the fan on so it'll run and serve as some white noise? And when it's running, everything feels fine, and you're able to fall asleep. But somewhere in the middle of the night, the fan cycle stops, and all of a sudden you hear every creak, and every breath, and every distant sound outside the window, and it's unnerving. I can't sleep when it's quiet like that. And even when we do find a peaceful space, there's often that kind of silence that feels, well, almost deafening, where all you notice is the ringing in your ears left behind after years of constant noise. On top of all of that, we're living in a digital world intentionally designed to keep our attention and our brains constantly engaged. Every scroll, every notification, every short video gives our brain this small hit of dopamine, which is the chemical that helps us feel rewarded, motivated, and engaged. This reward system was beautifully designed by God to help us survive, so we can vividly remember what is good, and we know when and where to return to it when needed. But here's the challenge, my friend. Our brains do not have a natural off switch for stimulation. There's no built-in governor that says, that's enough input for today, thank you. So when we live in a world of endless content, endless noise, and endless access, our brains learn to crave constant stimulation, even when it's draining us, stressing us out, clouding our thinking, and even damaging our health. And that's, again, where fasting comes along. Fasting quiets the temptations. It removes one or more of those constant dopamine hits, and it interrupts the endless pull for input and distraction. And when that happens, the hunger then becomes more noticeable. That pull can feel sharper, but it's not because something's wrong. It's more vivid because your brain has been trained to expect constant reward. Those withdrawal feelings you're experiencing are actually a sign that your brain is working exactly as designed. That discomfort doesn't mean fasting is harmful. It means that something meaningful is actually happening. Fasting turns down the volume on temptations and distractions long enough for us to lift up our eyes and to see more clearly, to reset, to have a little bit more of an objective view, and most importantly, to hear that still small voice that God has and to be able to discern what He's already saying. And that is one of the reasons fasting can feel harder now than it did maybe in biblical times. We have a whole lot more distractions today. Which brings me to the next reason fasting is such a challenge today, because our culture no longer honors fasting the way it once did. You know, in earlier generations, fasting was actually woven into everyday life. It was expected, planned for, even looked forward to. People lived with fewer distractions and more natural rhythms. But today, fasting feels, well, really countercultural. But I want to invite you to stop for a moment and think about it. Fasting isn't really so strange or unnatural. Our modern culture is. Human progress has accelerated faster than our bodies and brains were ever designed to adapt to. We now carry the emotional weight of tragedies that are happening not just in our own communities, but across the entire world, in real time. Our nervous systems were never designed for that. We were designed to care deeply for a small circle of people, our family, our neighbors, our community, people we know and we share life with, and that we can actually help and make a difference for. But today, we are exposed to a constant stream of danger, loss, tragedy, and crisis far beyond what we can actually process. And because our brains are wired for survival, that negative information captures our attention far more strongly than positive news. Media outlets understand this all too well. If good news actually drove ratings, you'd see more shows with good news. So our culture is saturated with this urgency, fear, and stimulation that's just constant all day, every day. At best, this makes us calloused to the tragedy that happens around us because we're just so used to hearing about it. But at its worst, this can actually cause more anxiety, more stress, more depression, and all of that can degrade our physical and our mental health. Our culture celebrates accumulation, more achievement, more success, more comfort, more consumption. But the irony is, the more we have, the more we feel we need, and the less satisfied we become with what we have. This applies to food, alcohol, sugar, entertainment, work, money, sex, and even productivity itself. But it's not a personal failure. It's actually how human brains respond to abundance without boundaries. And we have very few tools to reset and relax all of this constant input. Our culture doesn't celebrate self-denial. It celebrates achievement, accumulation, and constant progress. So we rarely pause long enough to ask, are we pursuing even something we want to pursue? Is it healthy? Where does all of this lead us? Often not to the great and perfect life that culture wants to sell us on, but rather to a life that's left without purpose, connection, meaning. Is what you pursue bringing you peace or just piling on more noise? I've said this so many times on this podcast, but I truly believe that everything in life is learned. We have to learn how to sit still. We have to learn to be comfortable with silence. We have to learn how to say no, not out of restriction, but out of wisdom. When a culture tells us more is always better, we never get the chance to discover that sometimes, truthfully, less is more. Less noise, less clutter, less stimulation, more clarity, more peace, and more space for God. So, my friends, if you've ever tried fasting and you found it really difficult, I'd love to just encourage you. It's not because you failed. It's not because you're weak. You simply were never trained for it. Fasting is still a very holy practice, a gift for the body, mind, and the soul. It's an invitation to step out of the noise for a time and reorient what's been driving us. And that reorientation can be a little unsettling because when we slow down long enough to really notice what's going on inside and around us, well, fasting has a way of revealing things that we don't always want to see. Which brings me to the final reason that fasting can be challenging. Fasting has a way of exposing our fears, what we've been using to fill our empty spaces, what we've put in God's place. God is our creator, and each of us was made with a God-shaped hole specifically designed for him. But that space doesn't necessarily guarantee that God will fill it. We have to choose that. If our lives become completely filled with success and achievement and entertainment, kids' activities and volunteering and constant activity, well, there's very little margin left to notice God, let alone his presence or hear that still small voice and invite him in. I'll tell you what, evil knows that if every single moment of your day could be fully scheduled and full of other things, then guess what? You don't have any margin left for God. That's exactly what evil would like to see happen. And that distraction doesn't necessarily have to be sinful to be effective. It just needs to be constant. And this is often where fasting becomes uncomfortable, not because it's dangerous, but because it stirs up inside of us some difficult and honest questions. Questions like, what do you mean I might need to set something aside that I really enjoy for something that I can't fully see yet? Or, can I fully trust God here, especially if I have felt disappointed, confused, or let down in the past? You might wonder, can God really comfort me the same way my favorite food does, or that nightly glass of wine, or a mental escape I get from scrolling social media? Sometimes the hardest question of all is just, what if listening to God means I have to change? Again, change is hard, my friend, even when we know it's good for us. But remember, fasting doesn't expose these things to shame us. It brings them into the light so God can meet us right where we're at and gently, patiently, and with love help us reset and heal. God doesn't expose us to condemn us. He exposes us to heal us, to refine us, and to draw us closer to him. You are capable of growth. We are all capable of change. We are all capable of more. And every day that we're given breath is another opportunity to learn and to soften our hearts and to realign ourselves with the things that really matter. Fasting can help us slow down long enough to love people better and to serve our families and our communities more faithfully and to establish a deeper, unshakable relationship with Jesus Christ, who will give you peace and strength in every circumstance, even when that peace makes no sense to somebody who doesn't know Jesus yet. This is what fasting can do for us. And that is the invitation of fasting. There's no pressure, no punishment, just rest and peace. Wow, there's so much in this episode to think about. I hope that you will take some time to really ponder some of these truths. I have 4 quick reminders for you. First, if fasting feels hard, that does not mean you're failing. Often, the difficulty is simply a sign that something meaningful is shifting and your brain is learning to adapt. Second, fasting is challenging because of the world we live in. It's not because there's something wrong with you. We live in a culture of constant noise, stimulation, pursuits of comfort. Stepping out of that soup of temptation takes practice, sometimes a lot of it, before it feels comfortable. Third, fasting is not about willpower or perfection. It's about creating space for yourself and for God to speak, to heal, and to gently reorder our hearts. And finally, fasting can expose truths of our own internal battles, our own shortcomings, and even help us see our successes and strengths with more clarity. Awareness feels a little scary sometimes, but that's the beginning of growth, and that's the kind of change that creates a life we love. You're not alone, my friends. We all feel that discomfort, but we can work through it one layer at a time with God and friends by our side. Hey friends, if this mini-series or this episode has stirred a curiosity in you about fasting, then I'd love to personally invite you to join the Priority Waitlist for the Fasting Way experience. It's a guided, faith-centered experience, and it's going to begin in February for Christian women who want to explore fasting as we head closer toward the Lenten season. Those who'd like to participate will learn more about fasting with or without restricting your food, and you'll have the support, wisdom, and grace of friends to go on that journey with you. There's no obligation here whatsoever. This is just an open invitation. You'll find the link at the top of the show notes here wherever you're listening or watching this episode. Next week, we're going to talk about something beautiful: how fasting, when approached with humility and grace, can actually help us hear more clearly from God. So thank you for joining me today. And until next time, please be encouraged and inspired. And I'll see you right back here next week at the Sunshine Cafe.